Imagínate despertar un día con fiebre. Al día siguiente tienes unos bultos enormes en el cuello. Al tercer día, ya no estás. Eso le pasó a millones de personas en el siglo XIV. Ahora, ¿y si te digo que puedes aprender todo esto en inglés? Porque hoy lo vas a hacer.
In the year 1347, a ship arrived at the port of Messina in Sicily. The sailors on board were dying. Their bodies were covered in dark swellings. They were delirious, in pain, and barely alive. The local authorities tried to send the ship away, but it was already too late. That ship didn't just bring sick people. It brought the end of the world as medieval Europe knew it. This is the story of the Black Death. The Black Death was caused by a bacterium, a very small living organism called Yersinia pestis. This bacterium infected rats, and the fleas that lived on those rats transmitted it to humans through their bites. The disease had three main forms. The first was bubonic plague, the most common one, which caused painful swellings called buboes in the neck, armpits, and groin. The second was pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs and could spread through the air. And the third was septicemic plague, the most deadly form, which infected the blood directly. Symptoms appeared fast: high fever, chills, vomiting, extreme tiredness, and those terrifying dark swellings. In serious cases, the skin turned black due to gangrene. Most people died within 3 to 5 days after the first symptoms appeared. The mortality rate was around 80%. That means only 2 out of every 10 infected people survived. Scientists believe the disease started somewhere in Asia, most likely in Central Asia, near the ancient Silk Road trade routes. From there, it spread westward. The first well-documented outbreak in Europe happened in a city called Kaffa, modern-day Feodosia, in Crimea, which was being attacked by Mongol warriors. According to historical sources, the Mongols began catapulting the bodies of their plague victims over the city walls, making it one of the earliest examples of biological warfare in history. When the Genoese merchants inside the city fled by ship, they unknowingly carried the disease with them. Their ships passed through Constantinople, Alexandria, and finally docked in Sicily in October 1347. From there, the plague traveled along trade routes to Genoa, Venice, and Marseille, then moved to Paris, London, and eventually across all of Europe. In just 5 years, the disease traveled more than 4,000 kilometers, and this was without planes, trains, or cars. Several factors made the Black Death almost impossible to stop. First, the incubation period, the time between infection and the appearance of symptoms, could be up to 12 days. This meant a person could feel completely healthy for almost 2 weeks, while spreading the disease to everyone around them without knowing it. Second, European cities in the 14th century had very poor sanitation. There was no running water, no proper sewage systems, and no separation between clean water and dirty water. Rats lived inside homes, and garbage was thrown into the streets, creating the perfect environment for disease to spread. Third, Europe was already weakened. Between 1315 and 1317, a terrible famine had killed millions of people, leaving the population malnourished with almost no ability to fight a new disease. And fourth, the continent was at war. The 100 Years' War between France and England had just begun in 1337, and soldiers traveling from city to city brought rats, fleas, and bacteria with them wherever they went. The fear during the plague was enormous. People didn't understand what was happening, and they had no effective treatment. Parents abandoned their children. Husbands fled from their sick wives. Neighbors refused to help each other. The streets were full of bodies, and churches which were supposed to be places of comfort became storage places for the dead. Doctors didn't know what to do, and many ran away. Those who stayed tried desperate treatments, including bloodletting, cutting the skin to remove blood, based on the idea that it would balance the body. It didn't work. It only made patients weaker and often killed them faster. There was also the famous image of the plague doctor in a black coat and a long beak-shaped mask. However, it's important to clarify something. That mask was actually invented in the early 17th century, about 250 years after the Black Death. So if you see that image in a movie about the 1348 plague, it's actually a historical mistake. As always happens in times of crisis, people needed someone to blame. Across Europe, Jewish communities were falsely accused of causing the plague by poisoning the water supply. These accusations had no evidence at all. They were simply lies born out of fear and prejudice. The consequences were horrific. Pogroms, or organized attacks against Jewish communities, spread across the continent. Thousands of Jewish people were killed in cities like Strasbourg, Basel, and Erfurt. In Strasbourg, in February 1349, around 2,000 Jewish people were burned alive in the city square, and the plague hadn't even arrived there yet. Pope Clement VI tried to stop this madness by issuing official statements saying clearly that Jewish people were not responsible for the plague and ordering church leaders to protect them. But in the middle of a panic, the voice of reason had very little power. Behind the violence, there were also economic interests. Many Jewish people had been pushed into money lending because other professions were closed to them, which meant that eliminating their community was, for some people, a convenient way to erase debts and steal their property. Without modern medicine, people had to rely on observation and logic to fight the plague. In the city of Ragusa today, Dubrovnik in Croatia, officials made a groundbreaking decision in 1377. All arriving travelers had to isolate for 30 days before entering the city. Later, this period was extended to 40 days. In Italian, 40 days is 40 giorni, and that is exactly where the word quarantine comes from. Venice and Milan also took strong measures. In Milan, city officials sealed the doors and windows of houses where the sick lived to prevent anyone from leaving. It sounds cruel, but it saved many lives. Hospitals for infectious diseases, called lazarettos, were also created, with the first one specifically for plague patients built in Venice in 1403. Doctors slowly began to understand that isolating the sick was the most effective way to stop the spread, and one of the most forward-thinking physicians was Ibn al-Khatib, an Andalusian doctor, who recommended isolating patients and burning their clothing. The numbers of dead are staggering. In Europe alone, it is estimated that between 30 and 50% of the entire population died, around 30 million people out of approximately 80 million. In some regions like Italy, southern France, and parts of Spain, the death rate was even higher, reaching up to 80% in certain rural areas. In Florence, the population dropped from 120,000 to just 50,000 people. In England, the population fell from around 7 million to less than 4 million by the year 1400. In Asia and Africa, between 40 and 60 million more people are estimated to have died. The peak of the epidemic was between 1347 and 1353, but smaller outbreaks continued for decades, and Europe didn't fully recover its pre-plague population until the 16th century, about 200 years later. As terrible as it was, the Black Death changed the world in ways that eventually led to something new. The feudal system, the medieval way of organizing society, where peasants worked the land for powerful lords, began to collapse. With so many people dead, there was a shortage of workers, and surviving peasants suddenly had power. They could demand better pay. They could leave. For the first time in generations, they had options. Nobles tried to fight back. In England, the Statute of Laborers was passed in 1351 to freeze wages and prevent serfs from moving, but nobody could really enforce it anymore. The old system was broken. The church also suffered deeply. Many priests died or ran away, leaving communities without spiritual guidance at their most desperate moment. This loss of faith pushed people to question authority and start thinking for themselves. These changes helped plant the seeds of the Renaissance, a period of art, science, and humanist thinking that began in the 15th century. The plague didn't cause the Renaissance directly, but it destroyed enough of the old world to make space for something new. The failure of medieval medicine also forced doctors to start observing, experimenting, and questioning old ideas. Universities were founded to replace the massive numbers of educated people who had died, and autopsies became more common, helping people understand how the human body really works. For centuries, nobody knew exactly what had caused the Black Death. That changed in 1894, when a Swiss physician named Alexander Yersin discovered the bacterium Yersinia pestis during an outbreak in Hong Kong, a bacterium that was even named after him. But the final confirmation came much later. In 2010, researchers analyzed human remains from medieval cemeteries in London, Barcelona, and other European cities, and found the DNA of Yersinia pestis in the teeth and bones of the victims. After 700 years, the mystery finally had a confirmed answer, and in 2022, another discovery pushed the story back even further. Infected remains were found in Central Asia, near modern-day Kyrgyzstan, dated almost 10 years before the plague reached Europe, strongly suggesting that the epidemic began along the Silk Road and traveled westward with merchants and traders. The good news is that the plague still exists today, but it is no longer a global threat. Every year, between 1,000 and 3,000 cases are reported around the world. Madagascar has the most frequent outbreaks in 2017. There were more than 2,400 cases and over 200 deaths. In the United States, a few cases are reported each year in states like Arizona, California, and New Mexico, where infected fleas still live on wild animals. Today, if caught early, the plague can be cured with antibiotics like streptomycin or doxycycline. What once killed 8 out of 10 people can now be treated with a simple course of medication. The key is early detection, strong public health systems, and fast response, all the things the 14th century simply didn't have. The Black Death was one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. In just a few years, it killed tens of millions of people, collapsed economies, destroyed communities, and shook the foundations of religion and medicine. But from that destruction, something changed. People who survived a world that had completely fallen apart began to build a new one. They questioned old ideas, looked for new answers, and created art that reflected the fragility of life. And slowly, painfully, Europe moved from the Middle Ages into the modern world. The plague taught us how fragile we are. It also showed us how resilient we can be, and that, as dark as it sounds, might be its most important lesson.
Y con eso terminamos el video de hoy. Si llegaste hasta aquí, ya sabes más sobre la peste negra que el 99% de la gente. En serio, no es poca cosa. Aprendiste de dónde vino, cómo se expandió, cuánta gente murió y por qué una bacteria del siglo XIV terminó cambiando el mundo para siempre. Si el video te gustó, ya sabes lo que toca. Un like, compartirlo con alguien que estudie inglés o historia y suscribirte si todavía no lo has hecho. Nos vemos en el próximo.